Let's go. Are you kidding me? The Southeastern Conference forming its own playoff? It was floated out there earlier today by Pete Thamel of ESPN, but could this actually be a thing? Now, a little bit later, I'm going to share with you, to me, one side of the Florida State LSU game because there are some gambling lines that are starting to float out there. But the first thing here is obviously this is the biggest story, and you always hear me talk about this on this channel. There's so many explosive things that happen in college football, such as a Nick Saban and Jimbo Fisher beef, that really draws headlines. But really, the one thing that truly affects everyone is when you start to hear news about scheduling. I feel scheduling is the most important thing in every sports league because it's what makes the league. It's how we form these narratives around these sports. It is oftentimes the determining factor. Whether or not you win or lose games is how the schedule format actually works itself out. And over the next decade, there is so much that's going to change with not only the Southeastern Conference, but the college football playoff and just the sport in general. And I know we spend so much time talking about name, image, and likeness. And last week we talked about the new scholarship rules where you can sign as many kids you want as long as you stay under the 85 scholarship limit. There are so many new different variations of rules that are coming in and out of the sport that it's kind of hard to keep up with. But that's why I'm doing a video on this very thing, because it honestly is everything. It determines how you view success of a program is who is on your schedule. And for me, over the next decade, I just thought, well, of course, Texas and Oklahoma are joining the SEC, and you could potentially have a pod system. You could have, Pete Thamel talked about this in this piece as well. You could have a permanent opponent and 7 rotational games to make an 8-game schedule in each and every conference. You could stretch it out to 9-game conference schedule, which I think would be the absolute best, where it's 3 teams that you play every year and it's a rotational of the other 6 teams. Maybe there's pods, maybe there's not. Maybe there's divisions, maybe there's not. But what makes this to be very fascinating is this is insinuating that there might be a Southeastern Conference playoff in its own league, and there's no way to even determine how that's going to work and what is that actually going to do to the college football regular season in the Southeastern Conference. So let's start with what we know. The first thing we know is that Oklahoma and Texas are joining the SEC. That is something that is going to happen in the summer of 2025. Now, what is actually going to happen to the college football playoff? Well, more than likely, it's not going to get off the 4-game schedule until 2026. And a lot of that is a bunch of TV mumbo-jumbo holding that up. But the biggest thing in the story that we can objectively say from Pete Thamel, who, by the way, works for ESPN. He's always been a great insider, whether it be Yahoo or Sports Illustrated. But it is important to note that he does work for ESPN, which, of course, is a partner of the Southeastern Conference. One thing that's very important in Pete Thamel's piece is he does talk a lot about one man. And this one man actually is the most powerful man in the story. And that's Greg Sankey, the Southeastern Conference commissioner. Now, Greg Sankey is going to be the one that's really going to pull the strings here. Now, of course, all the Southeastern Conference commissioners are also going to be involved. But keep in mind, as far as Greg Sankey is concerned, this man is silent like the G in lasagna. He really is. Like, go back to the Texas and Oklahoma story joining the SEC. That was really kept under wraps. Really think about that. How explosive of a story that was, and how it kind of just flew under the radar until Brent Zwimmerman, I don't know how to say his name, of a Texas newspaper was actually the one to break the story. But that story really flew under the radar. And think about all the different things that Greg Sankey had to do to keep that under wraps. He needed to make sure for sure that Texas A&M's Ross Bjork, the athletic director there, didn't learn anything about it. But just in general, Greg Sankey really, kept that hush-hush. And it wasn't just him. It was obviously all the people that were involved in Texas and Oklahoma joining the SEC. So for information like this to get out, that means that Greg Sankey wanted this story to be out there. So what does that tell me? That the Southeastern Conference isn't really considering doing this. Now, could they do this? Absolutely, because the Southeastern Conference, of course, has won 12 of the last 15 national championships. We, of course, have seen Texas and Oklahoma join the Southeastern Conference, and who's to say that more powerful brands can't join them down the road? But I just don't see this happening, mainly because, number one, it would extend already a long college football season. Number two, Pete Thamel brought up the idea that maybe the 8-game, and that's what was theorized in this piece, an 8-game SEC playoff in a league of 16 teams really devalues the regular season that happened before that. So, the math doesn't really add up with that, and obviously it would create a lot of juice, a lot of gusto, a lot of the storylines, whatever you want to call it. But for me, I don't think that this is actually going to happen. I think this is more of a threat by Greg Sankey saying, look, the Alliance, I didn't like what you did. You guys, during the Rona, during the 2020 year, I didn't like the way that you handled things as far as getting football on the field. I don't like the athletic director. It was clear in the story from Pete Thamel that Greg Sankey did not like the NCAA president, former LSU AD. Why is his name? Mark Emmert. I don't know why it slipped my name for a little bit. But still, Greg Sankey has been very frustrated with a lot that has happened as far as college football playoff expansion is concerned and as far as a lot of other things are concerned. So, for me, I think this is just a threat. I really do. I don't see college football being the SEC, their own playoff plays the winner of the other playoff, because then you wouldn't have it wouldn't make rational sense to play non-conference games versus an Ohio State ever. And I just think that would regionalize the sport so much that it wouldn't make a whole lot of sense. So number one, I personally don't want it to happen. And number two, it's also just doesn't make a lot of sense. Now, of course, if the money is there for the SEC to have its own playoff, then of course the SEC is going to go through and have its own playoff. I just don't rationally see how this actually makes sense, though, in the grand scheme of things. So some really good stuff right here from Pete Thamel. You guys saw a good bit of the story. There's also some stuff about the Big Ten and the Supreme Court. You could check it out for yourself, but still some good work right there from Pete. Now, as far as Florida State is concerned, I do want to share this. The line did open up at 4.5. It is all the way down to 2 in favor still of LSU, but still that is quite a shift, 2.5 points already, and there really hasn't been anything that's happened. But for me, I think the more interesting side is the 51.5 number, and I honestly think that is pretty fair. I think some of us look at this as a high-scoring game because LSU's wide receiver core is so good, and Florida State has themselves a quarterback that is returning, Travis. But for me, I could see this being a lower-scoring, slower-paced game. You look at Cincinnati, their last 6 games versus Power 5 competition, with Mike Denbrock as the offensive coordinator, it all went under 51.5 points at Cincy. And Cincinnati overall played at a slower pace of play. Notre Dame did as well overall under Brian Kelly. And on the opposite side, Florida State has a new offensive coordinator, Mike Norvell, and Alex Atkins is now the co-offensive coordinator there. Also, some new play callers there, even though Norvell is still calling the plays and he's got a lot of play calling experience. I think there's going to be some jitters on the Florida State side. And remember this, both teams have some major questions on the offensive line. And this is the very first game of the season. So while Kayshawn is a guy that can get an over, when Kayshawn's healthy, a lot of overs hit. That's just how it is because he's that explosive. Still, I think I would be careful. I know that number looks very tantalizing to going ahead and smash the over because 51.5 isn't that big of a scoring line. I do think, though, this could be a slugfest, and if I were to pick one side, whether it's the spread or the over-under, I would pick the under in this matchup. But what do I know? I'm not Circa. I'm not the guys building palaces out west. So I hope you enjoyed this video today. Comment down below your thoughts on today's story. Would you mind an SEC-only college football playoff? It is Power Hour LSU. Bah! Oh, tonight we're doing some enchiladas. Let's